A General's Stand, a tale of justice in a divided America. Under the veil of a moonless night, on a quiet stretch of Route 17 just outside Richmond, Virginia, General Marcus Hayes walked with the steady gait of a man who carried the weight of command. At 58, Marcus was a figure of quiet authority, his dark skin etched with the lines of a life spent navigating battlefields and boardrooms. America in 2025 simmered with racial tension, a nation fraying at the seams. The air was thick with the unspoken, and Marcus, in his civilian clothes, felt the solitude of the road as a rare moment of peace. But peace, as he knew too well, was fleeting. A police cruiser screeched to a halt beside him, its lights slicing through the darkness. Officer Daniel Reed, a man in his late 30s with a swagger born of unchecked power, stepped out. His voice cut like a blade. "What do you think you're doing out here?" The question dripped with contempt, his eyes narrowing at Marcus as if the general's very presence was a crime. Marcus stopped, his gaze steady, unflinching. The stars above bore witness to the clash about to unfold, a confrontation that would ignite a firestorm across a divided nation. Marcus stood his ground, his hands relaxed by his sides. Reed, emboldened by his badge, pressed closer. "Get your hands out of your pockets," he barked, his tone a challenge. Marcus complied slowly, deliberately, never breaking eye contact. In his gaze was the weight of 1,000 decisions that had saved lives in Iraq, shaped military strategy in the Pentagon, and earned him the stars on his uniform. But here, on this desolate road, none of that mattered. To Reed, Marcus was just another black man, a target for his prejudice. "You think you're some big shot?" Reed sneered, his voice laced with disdain. Marcus's response was calm, measured, a storm wrapped in silk. "Officer, have you ever stood watch in Fallujah? Made a call that could save or end lives?" The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Reed blinked, confusion flickering across his face. He pressed on, groping for control. "What, you some kind of war hero?" "It's not heroism," Marcus replied, his voice low and steady. "It's responsibility." The power dynamic shifted, Reed's bravado crumbling under the weight of Marcus's quiet defiance. Unbeknownst to Reed, 3 figures crouched in the shadows nearby, their cameras capturing every word. Sarah, James, and Clara, local activists armed with smartphones, knew this moment was bigger than the road they stood on. They were digital warriors, ready to launch a truth that would shake the nation. "And who exactly are you?" Reed demanded, his voice betraying a crack of uncertainty. Marcus's answer was a thunderclap. "I'm General Marcus Hayes, United States Army." The revelation struck Reed like a physical blow. He stepped back, his face paling as the reality sank in. The man he'd harassed was no ordinary citizen, but a high-ranking officer, a leader whose hands had shaped the course of wars. In the shadows, Sarah whispered to James, "This is it. This goes viral tonight." The video hit the internet like a match to dry grass. By morning, justice for Hayes was trending nationwide. The footage, Marcus's calm authority against Reed's arrogance, played on loop across social media, news channels, and living rooms from Virginia to California. In Richmond, protesters gathered outside City Hall, their signs bold. "No more bias. Accountability now." Marcus's name became a rallying cry, a symbol of resilience against systemic injustice. In a modest home on the city's south side, Evelyn Hayes, Marcus's 80-year-old mother, watched the news with a mix of pride and pain. She'd raised Marcus through the Jim Crow era, teaching him to carry his light against a world that sought to dim it. "You're more than their words," she'd told him as a boy, and now, as she saw her son's face on every screen, she knew that light was blazing brighter than ever. She picked up the phone to call her old friend, Martha, a fellow advocate. "This time, Martha," Evelyn said, her voice firm, "it's not just a spark. It's a fire." Meanwhile, Officer Reed found himself in a storm of his own making. His precinct was flooded with calls demanding his suspension. News vans parked outside his apartment, their cameras relentless. "I didn't know who he was," Reed muttered to himself, pacing his living room. The words felt hollow, even to him. His badge, once a shield, now felt like a target. In bars and online forums, his defenders, those who clung to law and order narratives, tried to paint him as a misunderstood cop caught in a media frenzy. But the evidence was undeniable, and the public's outrage grew louder. Marcus, thrust into the spotlight, refused to let the moment define him as a victim. He met with community leaders, activists, and even police officers willing to listen. In a packed conference room at the Richmond Civic Center, he stood before a diverse crowd: black, white, young, old, skeptical, and hopeful. I'm not here to accuse, Marcus began, his voice resonating with the authority of a man who'd faced worse than prejudice. I'm here to remind us that justice isn't selective. Accountability is our shared privilege. The room was electric with tension and possibility. A veteran officer, Captain Laura Bennett, stood to speak. General, the system's entrenched. How do we change what's woven so deep? Marcus's reply was unflinching. Through leadership, unity, and refusing to stay silent. It's not about rank, it's about courage. His words struck a chord, and even skeptics nodded, sensing a truth they couldn't ignore. Outside, the movement grew. In Washington, D.C., protesters marched to the Lincoln Memorial, their chants echoing Marcus's name. In Richmond, a young teacher, Michael Carter, took to Atherley's stage. This fight isn't just for General Hayes, he declared. It's for all of us who demand better from the systems that shape our lives. The crowd roared, their voices a chorus of anger and hope. The backlash was swift. Pundits on cable news decried the movement as hysteria, warning of chaos if police were undermined. Online, trolls spread lies about Marcus's past, trying to tarnish his reputation. Reed found a small but vocal group of supporters who saw him as a martyr of traditional values. Yet, in the quiet of his apartment, Reed wrestled with doubt. The video replayed in his mind, each frame exposing the arrogance he'd mistaken for authority. I didn't know, he told a colleague over the phone, but the words rang false. Deep down, he knew he'd chosen not to care. In the state capitol, Senator Abigail Coleman, a longtime ally of Marcus, pushed for reform. She and Marcus met in her office, surrounded by stacks of policy proposals. The stories pouring in, Abigail said, gesturing to letters from constituents, they're a revolution. Together, they drafted the Community Empowerment Act, a bill calling for independent police oversight, de-escalation training, and community investment. The hearing was tense, with opponents warning of overreach, but testimonies from a nurse, a mother, and a former officer swayed the room. Kamala Jones, an activist, spoke with fire. This isn't paperwork. These are lives. The bill passed its first hurdle, a victory born of collective will. Back at the precinct, Reed faced his reckoning. The Internal Review Board found a pattern of misconduct, not just from the night with Marcus, but in prior incidents. Lieutenant Thomas Grant delivered the news. Suspension, pending further investigation. But this isn't just about you, Daniel. It's about changing the culture. Reed nodded, his defiance crumbling. He enrolled in mandatory training empathy, cultural awareness, and conflict resolution. It was humbling, painful, but a seed of change took root. He wrote letters to those he'd wronged, not expecting forgiveness, but seeking accountability. In the city square, a final gathering marked the movement's progress. Marcus stood on a stage, flanked by Abigail and community leaders. Change lives in action, he told the crowd. In every policy we pass, every interaction we choose to make just. The square buzzed with booths promoting mental health programs and community policing models. Families smiled, students shared stories, and officers pledged to engage. As dusk fell, Marcus sat on the square's steps, Abigail beside him. We did it, she said softly. But there's more to do. Marcus nodded, looking to the stars. We'll keep seeking the light. The Community Empowerment Act was passed, ushering in reforms that reshaped Richmond's police and schools. Reed, after months of training, returned to duty with a new perspective, mentoring younger officers in de-escalation. Marcus continued his work, not as a symbol but as a leader, ensuring the movement's roots grew deep. The city, once divided, found a fragile but real unity built on accountability and empathy. This story isn't just Marcus Sitzar's. What do you think about the role of justice in confronting violence and inequity? Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you stand with reform, or do you see another path? Let's talk about the world we want to build.